anxiety, battered self-esteem. I thought my life was over at 18 because I was done with this sport that was done with me.
Hello, world. This is Just Being Intentional. My name is Thomas Harris. I'm your host. Today's guest, I have Jennifer Sey. She is an author, a wife, a mother, an advocate, and an executive businesswoman. She wrote a book called Chalked Up, Exposing the Abusive Coaching Practices in Gymnastics. She also wrote another book called Levi's Unbuttoned. She is also a 7-time national team member of the U.S. gymnastics team and a 1986 national champ. Jennifer is currently the founder and CEO of the clothing brand called XXXY Athletics, which is the only athletic brand standing up for women's sports. And we'll talk about that later on. But Jennifer, thank you for joining us on the show. We are so honored to have you here as our guest, and I am very honored to finally meet you. It's been a long time coming, so thank you for being here.
I'm so happy to be here, Thomas. Thanks for having me. I've been looking at your picture because you're one of our models on our website for XXXY Athletics and your lovely daughter. So thanks for that, and it's nice to finally meet you.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation to play model with my daughters. The pictures came out great. I can tell they came out great because they've been posted. So yeah, that's very encouraging to know.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
We wouldn't see them, I guess, if they didn't come out great.
Right. So I was thankful my buddy Brett was able to link us up. You've been interviewed on his show as well a while back. When I heard your story the first time, I was like, oh man, she is awesome. I am very encouraged by her power and her strength. She's got that dog in her, like they say in sports. She's got that dog and she just won't back down. So I appreciate it and admire your fight. So I wanted to make sure that we got a chance to meet. So again, thank you. So first off,
I was going to say, in regards to got that dog in her, in my first book I wrote about, which I forgot that I wrote about it, but my husband, when we were dating, he had read the book very carefully, and he was intrigued by a phrase I used in the book, competitor's ire, which I had from a very young age. And I think that's that dog, the competitor's ire.
I respect it. I really do. First things, I like to begin the show by giving the audience an opportunity to get to know the origin story of Jennifer Sey. So if you would share a little bit, as much you want to share about your background, what is your origin story?
Well, I was an elite gymnast as a child, so I had a very unusual childhood. By the time I was 10 years old, I qualified for the elite level, which is the highest level that allows you to qualify for the national team. So at 10, my first elite qualifier, I was already training 6 or 7 hours a day. I mean, the commitment required in gymnastics, it's pretty unreal and I think not relatable for most people. At about 13, I begged my parents to go to a better gym. I wanted to break into the top 6. I was sort of around top 10 or 12 amongst juniors, and I really wanted to break into the top 6 as a senior, which is what allows you to qualify for the Olympics and competitions like that. So I moved away from home at about 14 years old to one of the best clubs in the country, or at least it was known as one of the best, but it was incredibly emotionally and physically abusive. I got what I wanted. I became the 1986 national champion. I got a lot of broken bones as well that I continued to train on. And eventually I walked away from the sport in 1988, pretty broken despite my successes. Being a 7-time national team member and national champion, you would think you walk away feeling pretty proud of yourself. And I felt anything but. I was just coming apart really at the seams emotionally and physically, and I really couldn't continue. I had a serious eating disorder. I was training on a broken ankle for 2 years, and pain will drive you mad after a time. I mean, everything, anxiety, battered self-esteem. I thought my life was over at 18 because I was done with this sport that was done with me. But I went off to college and dusted myself off and rebelled a bit because the obedience demanded from gymnastics, I think, required that I rebel a little bit to kind of figure out who I was. And I ended up going to work in the fashion industry. I had a lot of repairing of myself to do, and I worked on myself quite a bit. And I was able to kind of pull myself back together and kind of out of the depths of anxiety and depression and anorexia. And I went to work in the fashion business. I eventually landed at Levi's in 1999. I got married around the same time, had my first child a little bit later, worked my way up the ladder at Levi's, was a wife and mom to two by 2003. I climbed the ladder. I sort of applied that same competitor's ire to the professional world, and I became an executive. Gosh, what was the year? Probably around 2008, 2009. So, 10 years in. It was not an easy thing, corporate America in the 90s and early 2000s for women. It was not really hospitable to women. You got maybe 6 weeks unpaid maternity leave. If you were nursing when you went back to work, you were doing it in like a sample closet with like a shower curtain. Like there were no facilities. You were batting away drunken sales guys at sales meetings. So it was tough, but I have to say, and part of what my second book is about is how much better things have gotten for women in the workforce. Because I think it's important that we acknowledge the gains and not pretend it's still, 1930. But I worked my way all the way up the ladder, and I became the chief marketing officer in 2013 and ultimately the brand president. During that time, I wrote a book, my first one, Chalked Up, about abuse in gymnastics. It was really the first-person account of how abusive the sport was, and that was difficult time for me personally because I really got a good dragging on the internet, and a lot of my friends from gym days left me, but proved I was right in the end 10 years later. Then once I was redeemed about my kind of speaking out about abuse in gymnastics, I decided to push back on closed schools during COVID because, why not? Just take on another fight. And I did that in deep blue San Francisco, while having a very, public facing role. It was very difficult. Literally no one but my husband in San Francisco agreed with me. I had children in the public schools there. The people telling me to shut up, largely the citizens of San Francisco telling me to shut up, were the ones with their kids in in-person private school. So the hypocrisy was rich. Right. And that kind of compelled me to keep speaking out. Eventually, I moved my family because San Francisco became people were posting my address and my house to come and get me, basically. That was the implication. So we left so that my kids could go to school and we could escape that harassment. And I eventually did choose to resign from Levi's, and I continued my advocacy for children. And now I've started a new brand, XXXY Athletics, that I think is like a combination of my background as an athlete, a fashion executive, and a person who says true but inconvenient things that make people mad.
You just gave the whole entree with the milkshake.
Sorry.
So what I wanted to do is back up a bit and kind of take some bites out of this entree just so we can see the fullness of the whole story. First off, being a 7-time member of the U.S. national gymnastics team and also being a national champ, can you share a bit about what that experience was like?
Sure.
I mean, you obviously pursued something you wanted to do. You're passionate about being a gymnast, and to reach that level of elite athlete, what was going through your mind as you were going through this whole process?
Well, I fell in love with the sport in 1976 watching Nadi in the Olympics. I was about 7 at the time. I was already taking classes, not super serious. And, keep in mind, this is just a couple years after Title IX passed. So, up until this point, Title IX passed in 1972, and there weren't that many opportunities for little girls who were very athletic and busy and jumping around the house. But gyms were popping up all over the country, and I just begged my mom. I could not spend enough time in the gym. Right. I loved it. It was fun. I was good, but not great. I was constantly told that I was too fearful or I wasn't fast enough, and I just wanted to get better. I always wanted to get better than myself. And I think that's something that you just have or you don't. I was always competing with myself to get better. I started competing at 7, and like I said, by the time I was 10, I made the elite level, and then I really doubled down on my training. I mean, I was training 6 days a week at this point at 10 years old. It's kind of crazy to think about that now. I have a 7-year-old. I can't really imagine her doing that, nor would I want her to. We can come back to that. But I loved it. I was really happy. I kept going to better gyms where I could get better. And then, at my last gym, it was a gym in Pennsylvania. I moved away from home to attend, and really things intensified there. But I felt like when I went there, Thomas, like if I just hand myself over to these coaches and do what they say, I will get what I want, or I have a good shot at getting what I want. And so I did. And no matter what was asked of me, lose 10 pounds, lose 2 pounds by tomorrow. This is a child with 1% body fat and not getting my period at 15, 16 years old. I just did it. Whatever they asked of me, I did. I broke my ankle at nationals. I got the cast off 9 days later so that I could get back in the gym and train because they demanded that. I did all that willingly until, as I mentioned, it really started to wear on my mind and my body. I think I had 3 broken bones in a row, both ankles and a femur, just one right after the other. I kept alternating legs. My body wanted to mature, but I didn't feed it because, we were told we had to make weight. We were weighed twice a day. We were called fat pigs. We were forced to do an hour of extra conditioning at the end of a 6-hour practice in a plastic sweatsuit to lose, a quarter pound. And by the time I was 18, I had a few months left to keep training for the Olympic trials, and I couldn't do it. I mean, it broke me, it just did. But on the other hand, I like to think of it a different way because I walked away with myself intact. I was, a little bit worse for the wear, but it was the first decision I really made for myself. I said, I'm not going to submit to this anymore. I'm not submitting to this abuse. I am walking away. And not one person in my life supported that decision, but I did it because I had to do it for me. Right. So in a sense, that's my coming of age story.
I don't know if people truly understand how much wear and tear it is on your body as a gymnast. Yeah. I see the training, I see the Olympics, and I'm like, one, how do they do what they do? But to think about how much training, how much just killing your body to, perform.
Yeah.
Like those breaks and everything, it's only inevitable that you're going to experience some serious damage to your body when you're pushing yourself that much.
One, I don't think people realize how dangerous it is because when you watch it on TV, they've, for the most part, mastered the routines and you're not really seeing these devastating falls. I mean, I broke my femur at the World Championships in 1985. Anyone can watch that on YouTube if they want. I myself have never watched it. The injuries are devastating. And when you're watching the sport and you see girls taped up head to toe, those aren't minor injuries. That's not a little extra support. That could be a broken ankle, quite literally. I mean, I was taping my ankle for competitions. It was literally broken. I did not find out how severe the break was until I was 40 years old and went to the doctor and got an MRI. And he asked me how I had shattered my ankle and when did I do it? And was it a car accident? That's what he asked me. So, yeah, I think you're right. I don't think people realize how dangerous it is, how living with that fear all the time of serious injury can really wear on your psyche as well. And I think the training, at least back in my day, and I think it's only starting to change now, it was just, there was no care for the athlete. There was no care to let an athlete recover from an injury. In professional sports, they've learned to let the athletes heal more so instead of just keep playing them because they want their investment to pay out. And if they destroy an athlete's body, that 10 million or 20 million or whatever, with us, they didn't care. There's another girl right behind you to take your place. So it was really out of the Middle Ages in terms of how they, forced us to train, the serious injuries that we trained on. And it was thought back in the day, it's changing, that you had such a narrow window of opportunity, that you had to be prepubescent, you had to be very young and very tiny. And so you didn't want to miss a season because you might only have 4 great seasons in you. Now, I'm pleased to see that at this recent Olympics, almost the entire USA team was in their 20s, mid-20s. Only one was a teenager, I believe. So that's progress. And I think these grown women are more likely to stand up for themselves, take care of their bodies. We see that with Simone Biles, dropping out of Tokyo. That was an act of, I hate the phrase self-care, but it was, she said, I can't do this and be safe. I'm not going to do it for you. I'm not going to put myself in an unsafe situation for somebody else. And so I think it's really good that they're maturing later and lasting longer.
Yeah. I served in the military for 4 years, and I am an advocate for our veterans, but also an advocate for those who are athletes, former athletes, because we find that there are similar struggles between these two groups during that transition period. And that's why I'm so passionate about it, because the transition part is huge.
I think that's right.
Yeah, talking about your transition from being a star athlete, elite athlete, to someone who had to eventually take on another identity. So that transition part from saying, I cannot do what I used to do any longer, and then making another decision to do something different. How did that look for you?
It's so insightful. I think you're right. The transition is very similar. And Michael Phelps has talked about this a lot, the depression in going from this, world-class gold medal winning athlete to what at a fairly young age, it's very difficult. And, I had a tough 10 years after I left the sport till I figured out who I wanted to be when I grew up. And I think it's because, when I got to college, everybody there, it was like they were starting their life. And I felt like mine was ending at 18. That's a tough thing to feel, and I went to Stanford. I was very lucky. And Stanford is this amazing place where it has this incredible academic record, but they also have amazing athletes. And I met athletes in my freshman dorm that would go on to be professional tennis players, baseball players, and football players, and basketball players. And I was mad. They got to do this thing and make it their career. And I was as good in my sport, if not better than they were. And I couldn't do it. Gymnastics is a young person's game. And I didn't know. I was just mad. And that was part of what my rebellion was about. I was like, raging against the world. And the other thing that's hard, I bet this is very similar to coming out of the military. Your life is so regimented in sport.
Right.
And as much as I came to resent it, I didn't really know what to do every day when I woke up, when it was my choice. I didn't know. I knew I could work harder than anybody. Like, there was no amount of work in my life, and there still hasn't been, that is ever going to be as hard as that was. Training 8 hours a day on 300 calories and a broken ankle. Yeah, this is a cakewalk what I'm doing now. But it was like the whole day was my choice. What classes was I going to take? How was I going to participate? Was I going to work hard to get A's, or was I going to go out at night? What kind of friends? Did I want a boyfriend? Was I going to be an advocate? Was I going to do community service? It was overwhelming because, like I said, I had handed myself over to my coaches and I did exactly what they told me. And now I had to figure out what I wanted to do. It was a very difficult time.
The similarities between having a structured, regimented program, like going to boot camp, when you arrive, they look at you up and down and they say, you know what? I don't like what I see. I'm going to tear it down. I'm going to build it up to what I want it to be. And it's the same thing for an athlete. They make you become what they want you to be. When it's all said and done, you're saying, I'm walking away. Okay, you're on your own. You got to figure it out by yourself.
Right. And most young people, hopefully, I think that this is not happening to the extent that it needs to in today's world, because they're so protected from just their own decision making and from failure. But most young people ideally are experimenting with identity, figuring out what they like, maybe failing at some stuff and picking themselves up and dusting themselves off. I mean, you do learn resilience in sport because you fail a lot, but I hadn't tried on different identities. I was a really good student, but I was not a very curious or engaged student. I checked the boxes and got the A's. I don't know that I learned anything. And so I got to school and I had no idea what I wanted to study. I was very intimidated by the academics. And I really thought at some moment somebody was going to pop out and say, you don't belong here, because there were all these young people who had much more dedication to their academic life in high school growing up. And so I felt like an imposter. I learned later that imposter syndrome is very normal for type A women, and I am no exception. It was difficult. I first rebelled pretty aggressively. I always stayed engaged. I got really good grades in college. Like, at the end of the day, I'm a good girl. I got my good grades, but I don't think I really started to figure out who I was until after college. I went to work. I realized I was quite good at this work. I started at an advertising agency. This idea of sort of combining business with culture and building brands that are culturally relevant. So there was this artful aspect to it, but it was also very rigorous financial discipline. I liked both parts of it. But for a long time, I thought I didn't want to do it. I don't know. I don't think I really figured out who I was until I was 40 and I wrote that first book, Chalked Up. It took me a long time. I will say by the time I got to my sort of mid 30s, I was done with all the eating disorders. I was done with not thinking I was good enough. I was much more confident. I wasn't depressed. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't any of those things. But I think until I wrote that book and really told the story of what happened, I wasn't able to shut the door on it.
Let's transition into these books that you wrote, Chalked Up and Levi's Unbuttoned. Tell us a little bit about what these books are about. You already talked a little bit about it. But.
Yeah, I think Chalked Up was about making sense of that world and that childhood for myself. Because the thing is, all that treatment, all that abuse, the emotional and physical abuse, you're told if you can't handle it, you're weak. And so then when you're suffering, even after you leave the sport, you think it's your own fault. It's your own weakness. So I had to kind of square that experience and say things that I felt ashamed of. I felt ashamed that I had suffered under the hands of this abusive coaching because I thought it was indicative of the fact that I wasn't strong enough. But what I realized as I went through it and exposed it and kind of put sunlight on it was abuse. Of course I suffered. My mission became, I didn't want other kids in the sport or any sport to have to go through that to do the sport they love. Despite the fact that there was a lot of blowback, I was harassed by leaders at USA Gymnastics to shut up and stop talking about it. I kept going because I wanted to protect children, and I wish some adult had done the same for me.
And this turned into a documentary, correct?
That's right. In 2020, I started in 2018, but in 2020, the documentary called Athlete A came out on Netflix. And it really is the story of Larry Nassar, the former quote unquote doctor for USAG, who's in prison now for life for sexually assaulting over 500 athletes.
Wow. Crazy.
Yeah. And what I tried to do in the film, which I think I did successfully with an amazing team, is connect his crimes and the fact that he was able to do that for 30 years to the abusive culture overall. Because he's not one bad apple. The sport is rife with it.
The entertainment industry itself is littered with guys like that. And it's sad, it's maddening, but we need more people to speak out on these things. Advocacy is a huge part of getting messages out that's going to benefit people in the future. So we got to be about our business.
And I think we have to be strong enough to withstand the criticisms and the name calling, because somebody has to go first, and usually that brings other people along, and courage begets courage, and then you start a movement.
Going to bring that up a little bit about the backlash. Okay. Levi's Unbuttoned. You were brand president for Levi's for a long time. What happened?
I love the brand. I had worn the brand since I was a child. It was such an honor to get to work there in 1999 and to stay for 23 years, which is unheard of in the world today, to stay in a company for 23 years. And it was really because I loved the brand. I had worn the brand. I respected the culture, but I wanted to improve it. In a sense, it was always kind of a pretty cool culture. I left the Gap, which I did not like working there. I worked there about 3 years because it was there was no sort of allowance for any individuality. Whereas at Levi's, you could dress like you wanted, you could be yourself. I really loved that about the company. And as I said, no corporate culture was great for women in the late 90s and early 2010s. So I committed myself to, being part of improving that, and it has improved. The book it's a memoir about my whole life. It includes gymnastics. It includes my first marriage, which did not work out, my second marriage, my children, and my advocacy during COVID, which I really consider as an extension of my advocacy for young athletes in sport. I saw school closures from the very beginning as incredibly harmful to not just San Francisco public school children, but the nation's public school children. And like I said, what drives me is protecting children. And I wish as a child someone had stood up for me. And I knew that this was incredibly harmful to children. We know it now, right? The consensus now is closed schools were harmful to a generation of children. But at the time, it was a very unpopular thing to say, especially in San Francisco. But I continued to speak out about that, closed playgrounds, masking of small children. And it just became untenable for me to live in San Francisco. One, I couldn't send my kids to school, which I wanted to do. And two, the community that I had built there over 35 years rejected me and came after me. I was called every name you can imagine. Some of them I had to look up. I didn't even know what they were. There were petitions from citizens of San Francisco that I should be removed from my job. Like, I mean, it was the people of San Francisco just came after me and my husband. And so we decided we didn't like those people in San Francisco much anymore and that we wanted to move. We moved to Denver so our kids could go to school. And eventually that led to me resigning from Levi's because I couldn't, work there anymore and live here. And anyways, it's the whole story about my advocacy for children and how that drives me. And I would just add that, as I was advocating for open schools, and it's of note, 2 years into the pandemic, 3 members of the San Francisco School Board were recalled because they failed to open schools. So I wasn't wrong. People got really mad about it in the end. Mm-hmm. But I think the other thing that became very alarming to me as I was going through this process in COVID was the suppression of speech and the censorship and the self-censorship and social censorship. And
Amen.
I mean, we know at this point the government censored dissenting opinions, but I think the social censorship is very dangerous. Nobody wanted to be called the names that I was being called. Nobody wanted to lose their friends, their community, possibly their job. And so that name calling is very effective. I am willing to take the hits and go first if it can inspire others to join. We can't let the bullies win. We cannot let them win because they are wrong.
End of the day, they're all cowards anyways.
They are cowards.
They wouldn't say the things that they say online to your face because one quick jab to the throat, Just kidding. I'm not promoting violence.
Although I did a reading in the Chicago area, and one such bully showed up and did say these things to my face, although she was hiding behind the bookshelves in the back. And I saw her lurking, and I actually pointed and I was like, "Do you have a question, ma'am? I see you standing there."
Right.
And she was just calling me every name. You're a racist, you're an alt-right, Christo-fascist, blah, blah, blah. And I just kept trying to engage her very calmly. And she eventually ran out of the bookstore.
Coward.
Yeah, coward, exactly.
Let's talk
also,
about
no substance in the argument.
Right,
Calling me
exactly.
names, that is not a substantive argument.
Yeah, we call it chirping. That's all it is chirping.
Yeah.
Let's talk about XXXY Athletics. This is a fairly new clothing line that you came up with. Was that just this year you started?
We started March 25th, so we're just one day over 5 months old.
Nice. And like we said earlier, I had the pleasure of doing some modeling for you as well as my 2 daughters. They look pretty
beautiful.
Good. Yeah. So we were grateful to be a part of that. How did you even come up with this idea of starting this clothing line? And what is the message behind what you're doing with this clothing brand?
We are the only athletic brand to stand up for the protection of women's sports and female athletes. And I was debating my next move after having resigned from Levi's in spring of 22. I started interviewing for jobs, and everybody was demanding that I issue a formal apology for my actions during COVID, and I refused. So I figured I better think of something new because I'm not going to apologize since I did nothing wrong. Oh, and by the way, I was right. And I actually started talking with our mutual friend, Brett, and I had this idea, but I didn't have the exact idea, to start a clothing brand that kind of pushes back on some of the excesses of wokeness that are so present in apparel brands around the world. And we came up with the idea. I mean, he came up with XX Athletics, and then we evolved it and landed on this idea of making it our mission to protect women's sports. He has a very strong advertising background. I have a strong product and marketing background. And I think we were both really frustrated with the fact that all these brands like Nike and Adidas and Lululemon, they claim to champion women. They do these big campaigns during Women's History Month, but they have not taken a stand to protect female sports and spaces from men. And so we thought, well, we could do that. We both have the experience and the background, and I don't mind saying things that make people really angry. I've been canceled twice, and now this is the 3rd time. You can't really be canceled 3 times. Yeah, we shook hands, and I'm so grateful to him, and we've been working on it together since last fall. We launched March 25th, but we obviously were working at it before that. So that was kind of how it was sort of necessity. Like, we both needed jobs, and we wanted to do something where we didn't have to sacrifice ourselves and be people that we are not.
Yeah. And I really appreciate this can't stop, won't stop attitude. Because if you're doing the right thing, you don't really care about what people are saying because someone's got to speak up. I'm a Christian, so I have to speak up, about what my beliefs are. And I know that people are going to respect me because I stand firm in that, but there's going to be people they're going to think I'm brainwashed or I don't think for myself because of that. But I can definitely think for myself, especially as a Black man in America. When I have multimillionaires and billionaires that look like me telling me that Black people are oppressed in America, I'm like, I don't subscribe to that. So let's stop while we're ahead.
Yeah.
Just being able to speak up for yourself, and also as an advocate, you're going to speak up for those that may be hesitant about it, but maybe you can inspire people to get up out of themselves and actually do something. But we're talking about it right now, but how do you deal with that backlash that comes from standing up for women's and girls' rights in the sports? Because I've seen some of the tweets that have been coming at you, and you're still standing there. And I'm going to back you up as much as I can because I believe more about what you're saying than some of these other idiots online. So how do you continue to withstand those fiery darts, if you will?
It doesn't really faze me anymore. I mean, I've had now 15 years to learn to withstand it. I mean, I will say when I wrote my first book, and that was a different day and age. It was like very early social media days. I didn't realize what it would be like when the trolls came for me. And they did, not just online, but like they would call in on radio shows. I mean, this is when that still happened, And it was very hurtful to me, and I tried to defend myself. And then during COVID, even in the early days in 2020, when I would get called names, I would try to explain why I wasn't a racist. Because the rationale from the people who loved lockdowns was if you want schools to open, you want all Black children to die. Apparently, even my own two mixed race children, I wanted to die. Obviously, the thing that had disproportionate racial impact was closing the public schools. It was the exact opposite of what they were saying. But I think, somewhere along the line around early 2021, I just didn't care anymore. And I knew that the name calling was the purview of those with no argument. If they had an argument, I was happy to have it, but they didn't have one. 9 out of 10 times, they're not using their real names. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not going to take you seriously if you're not even willing to put your name on something. I've never not used my name. I've never not written my own words and spoken my own words. So these people are not worth engage. They're cowards, to your point, and they're pathetic. But I do tell people who write me and say they're thinking of standing up on issue X, Y, or Z, you have to be prepared because these cowards can have power and influence. Yep. They can start calling your employer. I mean, I'm making a movie right now called Generation COVID about the impacts from the prolonged school closures. And there's a woman in the movie who talks about how when she was advocating for open schools in Portland, Oregon, people were calling her work and telling her work to fire her because she was doing this, advocating for open schools. Now, her workplace ignored them, but some don't. And so you do have to prepare yourself, but I don't care anymore. I mean, I'm completely in control of my own life. It's my business. No one's going to tell me what to say. There's nothing really anyone can take from me. So I'm not afraid anymore.
Yeah, and I might lose some friends just by having this conversation with you, but it doesn't matter. I'm old enough to know that, quality over quantity is what's important to me. If you can't respect my views, my way of thinking, what I believe, my belief system, then that's your problem. It's not mine, because I believe in diversity.
I agree with that. It is still hard sometimes. I mean, I'll admit I'm not like totally immune. I've lost 95% of my friends during COVID because they disagreed so vehemently with the things I was saying. And it is hurtful, right? Because these are people who have known me. These aren't new friends. These were friends of 30 years. And it's like, if you don't know what's in my heart, I'm a good person. Can't you see that we have a difference of opinion on this from a policy perspective and I'm not an evil person who wants to murder people? I mean, you know me. But I came to another realization as I went on that journey, which is you can't be mad at me and fire me as your friend. I'm mad at you. I reject what you did. You're the hypocrite. You're the one sending your child to a $60,000 a year private school and telling the rest of your city that they need to stay home and keep their kids at home. So, you know what? I disapprove of you. You can't fire me. I quit. That's kind of the friend version of that. So, it's not that it's not hard, but you make new friends. And you're right. It's quality over quantity. And I find most of the friends I have now in the circles I operate in, we don't agree on everything, but we always agree to disagree, and we're always respectful.
Right. I mean, I don't need all my friends to look like me or think like me. I believe in diversity. That means that people are going to be different, but we can agree on some things. We can disagree on other things, but we can still have enough respect for one another because the friendship is deeper than all of the nonsense, the back and forth debating. Like, I'm just not in that kind of business. But so what I like to ask each of my guests to consider is, because the name of the show is Just Being Intentional, what is it that Jen Sey needs to be more intentional about?
I need to be more intentional about not working sometimes, putting my phone down, spending the day with my children. In the world of startups, it really is, it's your whole heart and soul. And there really is not a moment where you're not thinking about it, not working on it. And I really feel like I'm so grateful for the 7 people that are coming on this journey with me, and I want to succeed for them, but I need to put it down sometimes. So like yesterday, we went to the water park. I took my 2 kids with my husband. We had family day, and it was just a really nice reminder that multitasking is not really a good thing all the time. I'm like a queen of multitasking, but I think I need to be more intentional about not doing that, putting the phone away, giving my kids my full attention. I mean, they get a lot of attention from me, but full attention. I could be more intentional about that. I think it's good for them. I think it's good for me. It's not good to have your brain on, always thinking, always worried, always going.
Yeah. We just go, and we don't stay aware about our surroundings all the time because we're focused on this thing I have to do or that thing. But you miss out on very important opportunities when your mind is everywhere else. And so it's a challenge not only for the people I speak with, but just as much or more for myself. So I have to constantly remind myself. So I just like to challenge people with that idea of being intentional because it's important for everyone. And I think in our relationships, especially, we get down to what's really important. What's the most important thing about this relationship? Is it being superficial on the surface level, or do we want to get deep because I care about this person that much that I want to invest in the right things?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I, am so grateful. I have 4 children, 2 grown, and still, very close with them. Lots of people aren't close with their adult children. I have 2 young children. I have an awesome husband who went through this tough time with me during the last 4.5 years. And I have these great friends and colleagues now at this company. And I want to just be grateful of that. And, I'm not always pining for what was lost, but I do remember it sometimes, and it makes me sad. But I think I can be intentional about being grateful for where I am now. I try to be, but I fail sometimes. So I work on that.
By the way, my oldest daughter that you got to meet is now married.
I was going to ask you.
She's married, and I have a son-in-law, so wins all around.
That's very exciting. Yes, I know that she was getting married this month because we discussed it. And Maggie, who was the photographer, is getting married next month, September, and they're about the same age. So
awesome.
Congratulations.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Any final thoughts for the audience before we part ways?
No, I love the questions. The last one in particular is a reminder to me to continue to try to be intentional about those things and to kind of be very grateful for where I am now, which I am. I love my new community in Denver and my new business and colleagues, and I get to meet and talk to cool people like you. So I'm practicing gratitude, which sounds like such a cliche at this point, but I think it's important.
No, it's a real thing. Attitudes of gratitude, I call it. I say it with my kids. Let's have, we're praying, we're saying, let's help us to have attitudes of gratitude.
That's a good one.
That's a big thing. Yeah. Well,
awesome.
I really appreciate you coming on. I hope we can continue this friendship, and I will continue to support your work, and, all the best to you with your business and your family and all of that good stuff.
Thank you, Thomas. I hope to meet you when I'm in Nashville again.
Well, I'm just down the street.
Awesome.
All right. This has been Just Being Intentional. My name is Thomas Harris. I'm your host. Thank you guys for checking in with us. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel and look for us on our other platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Thank you for being with us and have a blessed day.